You are all set.
Okay, welcome to tonight's ad hoc reappraisal committee meeting, March 9th. My name is Christina McEntee, and I'll be facilitating tonight's meeting. And we'll go ahead and do a roll call for the committee members. And we'll start with the folks in the room on this side.
Corey Baber,
Melanie Petrollo,
Debbie Lane,
Jonathan Hunter,
Dwayne McAfee,
and Bobby Mays.
And do we have members joining by Zoom?
Miriam McKinney.
Great. And Barbara Mills cannot be present this evening. So we'll go ahead and get started. Well, it's not advancing.
Push down on the keyboard.
We're going to start off with public comment. So if there's anybody that hasn't signed up for public comment that wishes to speak tonight, please go ahead and do that. And then we will have Rachel Edens will talk to us about equity impact analysis. Tom Tabit is here tonight to talk about the appraisal study and have a discussion with us about that information. You all have hard copies of the final draft of that. And then we'll talk about next steps and what we should expect in the meetings to come. All right, public comment. Have anybody signed up for public comment?
Nobody has signed up, but I will ask if you don't mind to give just a minute for people to connect to public input.
Anybody in the room sign up for public comment tonight? All right, Max, we'll wait for you to give us the go-ahead to move forward.
Sure. I'll just make an announcement. How about that? If you are watching on public input or on Facebook, the public comment session is going to be over, but please provide your input through the public input software. It's on the link on Facebook, or if you're watching on public input, there's a comment box. You can call in. The contact information's at the top. Leave your messages and leave your comments, and they will be sent to the appraiser's office after the meeting is over. So thank you. And Christina, you can go ahead.
Thank you. All right, I will turn the floor over to Rachel Edens.
So good evening, everybody. It's really nice to be able to see everybody back in the room after being away for so long. I'm happy that I've been able to be with you virtually, at least for the last several meetings. And as you remember last time, we talked about equity and equality again. We talked about the resolution again. And what I shared with everyone is that tonight we're going to start talking about looking at this charge that the commission has through an equity lens. So the title is Equity Impact Analysis, but really tonight I'm just going to talk about what an equity lens is, why it's important, what an equity lens tool looks like, why that's important, and how to utilize it and share a resource with you. I will say that on your desk or at your space, there are two handouts there that are from me. One is from the Harvard Chan School of Public Health, and that one is about an using an equity lens for decision making. And then there's another one that's specifically about what is an equity lens. So those are the two buckets that I'm going to talk about this evening. So, as I said, We're going to talk a little bit about the resolution because as I think I mentioned this either last time or 2 times ago, that I'm going to begin with the resolution, and every time I get up, I want to make sure that we keep bringing this back to our work. We've had some really incredible information, and I just want to bring everything back and center it by being here with you all to talk about equity before we actually get started. So we're going to talk about that for just a moment. Then, of course, why do we use an equity lens? What is it? Why do we use it? Why is it important? And what are the benefits to this as well? So, again, your resolution and committee charge. We have gone through this, but I'm going to read it again because something is highlighted in red for you all tonight. So, whereas recognizing the legally required tax assessments of real property and the appraisal process are confusing and largely misunderstood, and in light of recent charges that the process is not equitable, this board desires to create an ad hoc committee. Whereas the goals of this committee would align with the county's racial equity action plan, including 1, to identify citizen concerns, 2, to provide guidance on future assessments, and 3, which is in bold and in red, provide input into equity concerns. So last time I talked about the racial equity action plan and the action items that are in it. This time we're going to drill down a little bit more and talk about how to actually get there. So why do we use it? Why do we do this in equity work, and why does the county do its work through an equity lens? So as you can see, I'm just going to read off just very quickly that the purpose of an equity lens is to be deliberately inclusive as an organization makes decisions. So we're being deliberate, we're thinking about these decisions that we're making. It introduces a set of questions into the decision that help the decision makers focus on equity in both their process and outcomes. So this is the reason that I've been sharing with you as we've been getting started, even through these education pieces. We want to think about looking at everything that we gain through an equity lens, at the education pieces, what the outcomes will be, and of course, what our recommendations will be going forward. So these are 2 points that I thought were really interesting. This is also, I should say, it's adapted from a resource at Washington State University at Vancouver. So 2 pieces that I wanted to share. So an equity lens, for one thing, provides a shared language, authentic exchange, and formalized protocol for evaluating decisions, policies, processes, programs, and practices for equity. So I know that for a while, I kept drilling in on that equity versus equality piece and kept showing you cartoons and videos and so on. This is why, because I want everyone to have a shared language and understand what we mean when we say equity, and understand what we mean when we say equality, and also understand that many folks will use those interchangeably. And I want you all to be prepared to be able to discern what they're actually talking about, whether or not that's the word they use. Some folks will say equity, they're really talking about fairness and equality. So, and then also, for practical purposes, it results in more equitable decisions for our policies, processes, and procedures. And you all know that my charge as the Chief Equity and Human Rights Officer is one of the many things, and it's in the Racial Equity Action Plan, is to infuse and inform all the county's policies, processes, and procedures through an equity lens. That's my job. So in as much as you all are doing this good work, I just want to make sure that I'm assisting you in all the ways that I can as this commission. So another slide, just kind of a little bit more about what an equity lens can do and how it can actually assist us. So it can help us to recognize and also address how the institution may advance or impede efforts to become more equitable. So with this advance or impede, we're really talking about benefits and negative impacts. So we'll get to that in a second. It helps us to become more action-oriented, to eradicate disparities resulting from forms of systemic oppression, including racism. What we've been talking about and why I keep sharing the resolution is that we want to look at the disparities that exist and think about them through equity rather than equality. It helps us to realize equity efforts by first identifying and addressing barriers that disproportionately impact historically underrepresented and excluded groups, and helps us to explicitly engage and crucial conversations and intergroup dialogue about equity, justice, inclusion, and belonging. If you remember, the very first time I came to you, I showed you all the picture, the cartoon of the kids on the boxes, and one of them was justice, and that's where we're headed. That's what we want. That's the goal. So, and then some benefits of an equity tool. So we talked about lens, which is this sheet, black and white. I don't expect you to read it. I want to send this out because I'm going to talk about this more next week. I just want you to have a hard copy in your hands before we left. Okay. And this one also, equity lens and decision making. Again, you will get this information in your packet and emailed out to you from Rebecca, but as I'm talking about it, I just want to have it. So what are the benefits of an equity tool? So the equity tool gets us to the equity lens. So, last time I said, how do we get it done? What do? So an equity tool helps us to proactively seek to eliminate racial inequities and advance equity overall. I left the language as it's adapted from GARE, and this is from their racial equity toolkit. As you all know, we have a racial equity action plan in the county, so we do lead with race unequivocally. However, we do not stop there, and we don't ignore the intersections of oppression that happen. The REAP helps us to level set so that we can have a format and a guide for how to move forward for all areas of equity in the county. An equity tool helps us identify clear goals, objectives, and measurable outcomes. It engages community in the decision-making process, and it identifies, this is what I was saying earlier, who will benefit, who will be burdened by a given decision. And ultimately, it helps us to identify potential unintended consequences of a decision and develop strategies to advance equity and mitigate those unintended negative consequences. That's when, we think we're doing the right thing, or think we're making a good decision, and we haven't thought, what could go wrong here? Like what might be the things that we don't anticipate? So it kind of helps us to think all the way through the decisions that we make. So, as I said, last time I would share a resource, and this is actually Buncombe County's simple equity analysis tool. Just these 4 questions. This is what we're using across the county right now. We will be rolling out a much more comprehensive one later in the spring, but that is what we are using. So 4 questions that I asked you all to think about. And next week, or 2 weeks when I come back, we're going to talk about this more in depth, and I'll give more examples. But I just want to take away from your time with Tom too much, but I wanted to make sure that this is on your mind. So these are our questions. What populations and/or communities benefit from the request or change, and how? So this is our exact language. So when we think about programming here, who will get what? So for you all specifically, it might read something like, what populations or communities benefit from the recommendations that you present to our board, and how? So we don't want to think about, it might hurt fill in the blank community. How will it do that? What's specific about it? Then what populations and or communities will be burdened by the recommendations, and how? How do you plan to mitigate unintended consequences? As we talked about a little bit earlier, they do happen. So you have to think all the way through that. If you're a sports person, I'm a lefty, so you got to follow through, with what you do. You can't just hit the ball and Jonathan's smiling. He knows what I'm talking about. So we want to make sure that we mitigate those unintended consequences. And this is the big one. I really want people to think about this, because the source of data is something that can be very controversial. And when folks give us information or a data source, we tend to think of them as an authority, place of power. I ask you to question it. So what data source did you use to evaluate and answer these critical questions? That's always helpful to think about. Where'd you get your information? And is it reputable? Is it vetted? Just Wikipedia is a wiki, y'all. Yeah, that's what when I work with student affairs, that's what I tell my students. Wikipedia is a wiki. So I just wanted to bring those 4 pieces to you. I know this was very brief tonight, and I ran through it very quickly. I understand that I talked very fast. And I don't mean to leave anybody in the lurch. But I do want to call your attention to the handout that's in color. And again, I'm not asking you to read it or to have read it. I just want to share a little bit about the format of this document. And it's also coming to you in your email. So just so you know that. So section 1 is just about an equity lens. That's kind of that first part I was talking about. And then there's also this piece, that section 2, that I really think would be helpful with these 4 questions, where it talks about a multidimensional equity lens. So it talks about the people that will be affected, how the process works, and the place, our community as well. So I will have much more next week and a little more time to really delve in, but I just wanted to get this in front of all of you. And I am open to any questions, thoughts, or comments you might have at this time. I realize, again, I went through this quickly and you're probably still digesting. So any questions that you have that come forth later this evening or in the week, please forward them to Christina or Burnett, and I will be sure to get that information back. But does anyone have anything that they'd like to share at this particular moment? Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for taking the time to be open to this, and thank you for doing this good work. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. All right, at this time, I'm going to introduce to you all Tom Tavit. He's an economist with Geneva Economics. We practiced that. He is going to be providing a summary of his report that you have in hard copy of an inquiry into residential property assessment equity in Buncombe County. Tom's organization has a broad portfolio, which includes economic assessments for dozens of communities, industry targeting, economic impact analysis, workforce and skills assessment, micro demographic analysis, and a host of custom analyses answering specific site and client needs. The range of research activities has been as broad as economic impact analysis for universities, international airports, and major infrastructure projects, to micro demographic analyses of neighborhood gentrification and sub-state health insurance coverage. Please welcome Tom.
Thank you. How do I advance the slides?
You have a or with the.
Oh, okay. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. I did. Good to see you. So I'm an economist, and let me tell you what I do so you're comfortable with it. I just report on the data. I'm not an opinion guy. And I'm here just to relay some data on assessment equity study that I did. But I'm really here for you. This is your study. And so it doesn't do me any good if you don't understand it. So please interrupt me if I present something that doesn't make sense. It's pretty technical and there's a lot of data. Thank you, Rachel, for bringing up the fact that in my presentation, I don't say where my data came from. It's in the major report, but it's the tax parcel information. It's MLS, and it's a little bit of building permits, and it's census data. So that's the core, and there's really nothing outside of that. And you all have a copy of the report itself, the big 60-page. And what I'd like to do as we go through this is just refer to the page on the report. Obviously, I don't have a slide for every page, but so you can follow along and digest it as we go through it. So with that, if we're comfortable with that, here we go. And I've learned that PowerPoints sort of have lives of their own. So this PowerPoint is specifically to go along with the report. So once in a while, I'll see one of my presentations with a life of its own, and it's sort of disembodied from the information. So what is it? What are we talking about here? This is a quote from the International Association of Assessing Officers, which is the national, or I guess international organization. So this is what I'm tasked with looking at. Property assessment equity is the degree to which assessments bear a consistent relationship to the market value. That's it. Just, is it equal to or close to the market value? That's all we're talking about here. And I know Rachel again mentioned that that word is thrown out a lot, but that's all we're talking about here. Just, are the assessments consistent to what the market value is of the home? So how do we know, and this might be a little bit of a repeat for some of you, that assessment is fair or impartial? And that's where the beauty of the sales ratio comes in. And I didn't know this. I was telling Burnett earlier, when we first were looking at this project, I was kind of groping because, believe me, I don't know anything about assessments at all. And I still don't. I'm looking only at outcomes. But when I discovered the sales ratio, I realized what a golden thing that was, because one thing can tell us how close we are, how equitable an assessment is. So simply the assessed value divided by the sales price. That's all it is. And it tells us to the 100% how close the assessed value is to the sales value or the actual market value. So really my entire presentation is going to be built around the sale ratio and how close or how far that is and how it works out geographically and over time. So just a reminder, home is more overassessed if the tax value is greater than the sales, is underassessed if the tax value is less than the sales value. And the example here is if you had a home for $250,000 and it sold for $275,000, then the sales ratio would be 0.91. Now the acceptable ranges for a sales ratio according to the IAAO are between 0.90 and 1.10, which is plus or minus 10% of the value of the home. So you're okay with if you're in 10% plus or minus. If you're beyond that, then you're underassessed or overassessed. Everybody comfortable with that? Sort of makes sense. Here's an example. That $250,000 home sold for $300,000. The ratio is 0.83. It's underassessed and out of what would be the acceptable range. And on the other side, a home, same home, 250, sold for 200. The ratio is 1.25. It's overassessed. That means your tax value is out of range. It's too high for that house. So in the inquiry, the organization is, we're going to look at sales ratios for the county overall, and then for individual communities, and I'll explain what those communities are. We're going to look at just overassessed properties, those with a sales ratio greater than 1.10 in the county and the community. And then we're going to look at low-priced homes, the ratios by the county and the community. And then finally, I have a couple slides just on other measures of assessment equity that I was asked to look into. So before we get into that, there's another factor in the sales ratio we got to talk about. We all know about it, but it's not fixed, and that's the denominator, and that is the growth in the average home sales price. So over the last 6 years, 2016 to 2021, I'm looking at the average home price in Buncombe County has risen by 43.2%. $118,200 or 7.5% per year, which is incredible. So you all know that. So that bottom number is always going up, that assessment over sales. And we can't forget about that. And when we go deeper into this, you're going to see that makes a big difference as time goes by, because that bottom number is always going up. And something that I think most homeowners don't understand, even if they're not selling their home, that value is continuing to climb. So I think a lot of people are probably surprised when they see their assessment values, not realizing that the value of their home, even though they're not selling it, is still going up because homes around them are going up because the demand is there. So I want to look at something below just the county level. And so what I'm coming up with here, this is 27 different, what I'm calling communities. They could be neighborhoods. The jurisdictions are nothing official. What they do is they overlay census tracts, because later on in the presentation, I'll be doing some demographic correlations, and we need good solid data for who those folks are that are within those communities. So these are 27 communities, neighborhoods, whatever you want to call them. Don't be upset if they don't exactly match your perception of those areas, but they basically are kind of the areas I think most people would assume are those areas. And like I say, what's more important to me is they strictly align with the underlying census tracts, so that I can do some demographic analysis. So here's what it looks like if we look at the percentage increase in the average home sales prices for those 27 different communities. And as you can, the darker the red is the greater. I think there are 10 communities that have appreciated more than 50% over this period of time. That's on page 11, by the way, or page 8 in the report. And you can see details on page 11 if you wanted for each one of those. And so that's some incredibly significant growth, but it's not uniform. And that's something else that we need to remember when we're looking at sales ratios, are that denominator is going to be a lot different for different communities. And that creates some differences with those sales ratios as well. So this is the big shocker to me, this chart here. This is on page 9. And so you can see, look at South Side has increased by 116%. In my review at the end, I talked about some communities having explosive growth. That's explosive growth. Got a question?
Well, comment and question. And so I just want to make sure we can clarify. These numbers on this page, we're not talking about assessed value. We're talking about actual sales in data that, right. And so I just want to be clear on that. These aren't make believe like something that Keith came up with or his team. This is real data.
You don't come up with
well, no, Keith, you know what I mean.
I'm not sure how to
Well, what I'm saying is this is real. This is real sales data. This is not literally assessed value that Keith came up with.
Or a better question would be, where did that come from? MLS and
MLS. Yeah. Good point though, because we could way out. Anyway, so this is real. So this is real, and you can see this is the average right here for the county. And you can see there's a lot of communities that have appreciated a lot. So again, that's something we need to consider as we go through this process and look at. Yeah.
Sorry.
No,
Let me make sure everybody in the room understands the MLS,
multiple listings.
where that comes from, and what that is. There may be some in the room that don't.
Well, you want to tell them what it is? You probably know better than I do.
I use CoStar.
Oh.
MLS is the multiple, he knows better. MLS is the multiple listing service that most brokers, and I'm a broker, but I'm on the commercial side, but MLS would be when someone lists their home, then that broker would go back in once it sells and put that data as a comp, if you will, into MLS. It would also basically show up at the, not Keith's department, but at the courthouse in the Register of Deeds that it sold for $250,000.
It's the real stuff.
It's
Really helpful.
So I have a question about the number of homes, and is that somewhere in here, like on the south side, this 116% increase? How many homes were sold there versus in Inca, for example?
Probably tease it out. We'll get there. If it's not there.
Just curious, because that can skew things too.
Yeah, well, these are different sizes too. Remember, these are different.
And I think that those numbers are in the full report. Yeah, I've read through most of it. I think.
Okay.
Might not be where I think it should be, but I think everything should be in there somewhere. And if it's not, I can get it.
All right. Thank you.
Good questions. That's what I appreciate. So, okay. So we've got these raising house prices, and we've got the tax values. And so we've got a spread here. You can see there's the tax values here. Let's see what this is on page 12 of the report. You can see between reappraisal years, the tax value and the actual value, the the sales value, they really begin to diverge quite a bit. And especially in a community like ours where we're looking at 7.5% increase in here. So we've got to consider that as well. There's a divergence between reappraisals where the numbers get pretty far apart. And so here's, I've just broke out the difference between the tax value and the home sales value. You see the reappraisals, it drops, but it got up to $56,000 in 2020, the difference in aggregate between the tax value and the sales value in the community. Okay, now we're going to get to what we're here for. We're going to look at sales ratios. I looked at 25,886 home sales between 2016 and 2011. And again, county parcel records, MLS, and then the Census Bureau data is what I used. So the data is all good and solid. I didn't use any estimates. I didn't buy any data. This is as direct as that can be. And here's the big chart. I guess we're going to, that thing on the top's going to always be there. Can you move it to the bottom? Sorry.
I know there's a way to do it.
Put that under the mold.
There we go.
Look at that.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's page 14, and this is a important slide to understand. So here's the homes sold each of those years, the sales, 2016 to 2021. The dark kind of brown, those are under assessed. So just take a look at that, look at the size of those, how that grows certain years and how it settles back in the reappraisal years. So you've got a huge increase in under assessed homes. The next slide I'll do, if you're comfortable with, the next slide is by percentages. So you get 2020, 72.6% of homes sold were under assessed, whereas just 1.9% were over assessed. And that was a shocker to me. The majority for some years are under assessed. So I know that people have a concern about over assessed, but inequity also under assessment is part of that problem too. For taxpayer, that might not be as important, but it is important to notice the huge amounts of underassessed properties between reappraisals and then the settling back. And by the way, the gray are all acceptable. That's between the plus and minus of the one, but all within the accepted range. And then the little red, those are the overassessed. So it's a small minority, it's significant, but it's not a huge number we're looking at year to year. The significant thing to know is the large percentage and number of hundreds. Here's the table if you want to look at it in detail. That's on page 15. And then here's each one of these is for the whole county, the year, the median sales ratio. And here I'm looking at the old IAAO range where this would be underassessed and this would be overassessed. And you can see as a county, we've had 3 years, the last 6, where overall as a county, we've been underassessed, which would be unacceptable to the IAAO. And you can see how that just jumps up to the right spot during the reappraisals. Everybody comfortable with that? We okay still? Is that what people would be perceiving? I know I was sort of shocked when I went through this the first time, but you guys have been in these meetings for a while and you might have a better handle on it.
So maybe you should elaborate a little bit more in terms of how the market housing market dynamics play into that trending.
Well, it's primarily because the price of the homes kept going up that 7.5% a year, and the appraisals and the personal keys, but appraisal didn't keep up. And I suppose that's probably
they don't keep up the non-reappraisal year.
monitoring that.
Sorry.
Let's make sure that Max gets everyone muted. We're good. Okay, you're good.
Okay. So here's how it looks for those 6 years for the communities, if you're a visual person. And really what I'm pointing out here, the darker the red is the closer to the 1, although none of them are 1. But the main takeaway here is how different the pattern is from year to year. I know that we are all concerned about certain communities that are maybe assessed differently than others. But even from this visual here, you can see that it pretty much changes year to year, the median sales ratios. These numbers actually change down here because they're so different from year to year that you can't put them all in the same color coding. And then here is another one of the big takeaways. Here's the 27 communities. It's important to understand this chart. It's if you haven't found it, it's on page 17. And you don't really see the highlighted numbers. The darker ones are outside of the range. They're below the 0.90. There's none above 1.10. So the takeaway here is for 6 years, the median sales ratio for all 27 communities are either close to or within the range or below it. No community was over a set on this measure. So this is an important one. This is, even though it's simple, it's important, and I hope you understand what it's showing. And the brown or the gray, the shaded ones are actually below the 0.9. Now, I also want to point out, going horizontally, there's no pattern. There's patterns for the years going up and down, but they shift. You see, there's no shaded lines in 2017 and no shaded squares, I'm sorry, in 2021, none at all. But there's also no community that has anything consistent year to year to year. Starting on page, and this is where it's really rough, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, but there's some really important information, is causation. There's little charts with a bunch of little dots on them. I don't have a slide of them.
Time's up.
I forgot to mention at the top of your presentation that we would be breaking in the middle for folks to have a quick break and gather their dinner, and it will be a working dinner. So we would ask that folks, is this a good time to do that?
This is because I'm going to give you a little homework. This is what they look like. We're going to talk about them, but I don't actually have a slide on them.
Is this in here?
Yeah, it's on here.
Look, it's in the thick one.
Starts on page 23. And I guess now is dinner time.
Yes, let's take about 5-7 minutes. Your dinner is out on the table, and take a bathroom break if you need to, and we will come back at 10 till according to that clock.
There's
and get started back on our presentation.
All right, thank you. Everybody ready to get going again?
Yeah.
Okay, the next section, there's really no slides for it because it's a little too technical, I think. Normally it wouldn't be something I would bring up, but it plays a very important role, and that's, here we go, correlation. So if you look at page 23, there are all these little charts that have these little dots on them. The dots are the community. So each one of those dots is a community. And it correlates to the number. Sure, that's okay. So the first one there, you see average household income. 23, I'm sorry.
24.
Oh, is it 24 in yours? Oh, sorry.
Of the,
23.
of the bigger, of the thick
The big
one.
one. 23 is a big one. Oh. There's a couple of those charts later on in the PowerPoint. You with it? Okay. So I'm going to try to make this simple, but I don't want to make it seem too simple. So how do we know if different characteristics of a community are aligned, misaligned, or correlated to a sales ratio? And so what you do is you do a correlation analysis. You put them up, the dots up, and you see if there's a trend. Does this go with this? When this increases, does this increase? So when the sales ratio increases, do the other variables increase in those communities? Make sense? Look at the first one. The first one is average household income and the median sales ratio. Now the median sales ratio is on the left-hand side, on the axis on the left hand, going up and down. You can see those are the median ratios taken from that earlier table for all the communities. And then the axis on the bottom for this one is income. So income increases as it goes to the right. And so those little dots, I'll tell you what, here's a clue. That dot way out there by itself, you know what that is probably. It's Biltmore. Income's really high. But you can also see the sales ratio. If you went across, you see the sales ratio is pretty high too. So this is a way to say, are these two characteristics, are these two variables associated with each other? Does the sales ratio go up when income goes up? And in this chart, it shows that it does. And I have a couple little numbers out there that I know and you can look up. And I highlighted the ones we specifically know. Yeah, go ahead.
And tell me if I mischaracterized this, but so it looks like to me on this first chart on the top left.
Mm-hmm.
So the two communities with the lowest household income, which are to the far left-hand side of that chart.
Right.
The one is assessed around 92% of price ratio,
Right.
and then one at 86 or 85%, let's call it.
Yeah.
So both seem to be under what market value would be
Right.
at. Okay, and then and you said this, but I just want to reiterate the community with the highest average household income has the highest sales ratio.
I don't know if it's the highest, or pretty darn close. Second highest, yeah.
Yeah, it looks like tied for
These are all in the report, by the way,
sure.
somewhere.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? It might sound strange. How can I'm trying to understand, are you saying that the ratio of income for a neighborhood would determine the sales of?
That is a great question.
Because, and I'm gonna say that because if that is what it's saying, it's really not fair. Because everybody in smaller community, and I always say that, I represent Shiloh, and we have seniors that have been living there for 30, 40, and 50 years. And then you've got developers coming in and they're building homes.
Right.
And the income of the people there have gone up.
So how is that gonna affect how is that gonna be fair for neighborhoods that have already been established all these years?
You reminded me something that's real important to say. This is not causation. This is not saying one causes the other. This is just saying, are they all related? When this goes up, does this go up? So, and that's important. That's going to be important as we talk through some of these. So it's not saying they may not even talk to each other. They're just going the same direction. As this increases, or as this increases, this decreases. It's a hard one. I understand that.
As we're looking at this first chart, as we're talking about it, what is the takeaway that you're trying to get us to understand?
Nothing for that. You know, so this is serious. So I did 18 of these for the
Excuse
different.
me. Can you tell me what made you wrong? Because
I'm sorry, 23.
In the
For the
other
big
one,
report, not the.
in the bigger one.
You have the big thick one, the 61 page.
No.
they don't have the big one.
Just be there.
There's another.
That's not the big one.
The big one's big. 61 page. Well, and I apologize, but hopefully I'm gonna lead you on to this is the way we figure out if a sales ratio is affected by race, income, poverty. This is the way it doesn't answer the question, but it says, oh, there is a problem. They're going in the same direction. So, for example, worst case scenario would be as the percentage of a racial group increases, the sales ratio would correlate the same way.
So that's where your data, you say you're a data collector.
You have.
So that's what your data would say.
Well, that's what we're looking at here.
That's what we're looking at, not saying that that's the way it should be, but that's the way it could
And they
be.
might not even be talking to each other, but are they related? I think that's kind of the central issue here.
Yes,
Are they related?
yes.
And this is the way you do it. Now, they're not saying this is the only way to do it, but this is the typical way where you say, hey, is this talking to this? Does this make sense?
Yeah.
And so by comparison, if there was
All good?
a neighborhood issue or an elder issue, that would also be pointed out by the data.
If I look at it, I didn't look at.
No,
But
yeah,
you're right.
just as an example, we'd be able to isolate that and see that.
You could do these on anything you think about. I just happened to pick 18 that thought made sense.
Uh-huh.
But if you got something you want to think about, hey, what about this? Does that affect impact or that talk to sales ratios? You can do the same thing. You good with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so I won't go through each one of these. Some of them are sort of confusing because they don't talk. They don't make sense. But I have in there race, I have ethnicity, I have poverty, I have the number of homes sold by density, I have the value of homes, I have the average price, I have the median price, I have renovations, building permits, just kind of seeing what's out there. And for the median sales ratio, for the community, race, ethnicity, or poverty, there was no correlation, no positive correlation. There was nothing to say the more blacks in the community, the higher the sales ratio because of that, or just those two things. So that's important to understand. And this is just at this level here. And that's what the data says. I mean, it's not a complete answer. It's giving us a clue. Is that true or not? Is there something there we need to follow up on? And if you found it, you'd say, okay, we need to look at that even further. So I want you to understand that. It's not like an answer like that's it. It's like, is there something there? Is there something we should follow up on? And for the median sales ratio and ethnicity, race, and poverty, there was no correlation. Nothing. And you can look at it, it's right here. And that's important for you to know, and it's important for folks to know as well. So we're good with that. It's kind of technical, and I I hated to do that, and I did that because I looked at other studies in these fields, and that's the way they raise a flag and say there's a problem, is when something's correlated where it shouldn't be, like race or ethnicity or poverty.
Can you speak to the fact that most of what you showed, they were pretty, dots were pretty tight together? There were some that were all over.
Some are way, I'll tell you what, and I could give a whole presentation on the south side. There are a lot of times there the number is way out there. The south side, as you may or may not know, has the highest percentage of Black owner occupied, has the lowest poverty rate, or I'm sorry, the highest, the worst poverty rate. As you already saw, the highest sales price growth of any community. So they're kind of the outlier. They're not really an outlier, but that's a crazy place right now. That what's happening in there. It's an unusual spot. So you'll see if you look at these dots, it's way out there. You'll see one dot. It's either going to be south side or it's going to be Biltmore on the other side. And it's interesting. And it's something that I guess people should know as well. So we're comfortable with that. And I apologize. We could spend hours on it.
Just one question,
Sure.
maybe everybody else knows. Can you explain owner occupied versus household? So it says median household income and median sales ratio versus median owner occupied household.
Sure, it's just the owners of the house. So it's a census question.
Mhm.
Household doesn't matter if you rent or own it versus, okay, you check the
Sorry.
box and you
Thank
said owner. And I think for us, owner occupied is probably more important.
Right, thank you.
Okay,
Tom?
Yeah.
I have a question, and it relates back to what we're looking at as far as households and income, et cetera. But when we're talking about the communities, and the communities are determined through the census, right? We're using the census community.
Yeah.
Okay, because what you said something about Biltmore and South Asheville versus South Side. So, and I'm not sure I can do that. Well, define South Side.
It's, look at the map here. I mean, that would be
Like Mission Hospital.
That's the slope. That's not Shiloh or Sweden Creek
No,
or
no.
South Asheville. South
No.
Side is the slope, right? Okay.
Yep,
You know,
like
I-
South French Broad,
Clayman Avenue.
Klingman.
Got it.
You know, people have a perception of neighborhoods, and some of that is just what you know from growing up and being on those streets. And it's hard to know where does that end. For example, you're going to see, this is called Shiloh / Sweeten Creek. Because if you look at it, there's Shiloh here, and there's a little piece that goes over
All the way.
to Sweeten Creek, and that's just the Census Bureau. I had no choice. It kind of stuck with that. It's good to understand, but it's a good way to sort of conceptualize and get an idea of different communities. And they are very different demographically in the way they've grown as well. So that was a big hurdle. We just made it over there, by the way. And so thank you for hanging in there. I don't know if there's any other way of doing it. You know, this is the data talking to us, and we got to live with it. And if it doesn't match what you believe, then I say we got to find other data. But this is the way you do it. You know, this is the industry standard. Okay, so we made it through median sales ratio. We're comfortable with that. And now I want to look at just that over-assessed, really the homes that people are most concerned about. And as I said, over 6 years, there was 1,397 of them, accounted for 5.7% of all homes sold. And it goes up and down according to the year, a low of 1.9 or 83 in 2020, and a high of 413 over assessed homes in 2017. And there's they are. It kind of looks like you took a shotgun and blew it. They're kind of all over the place, which again, to me, is a good sign. They're not all in certain areas. They're a little bit everywhere. Here's how it looks. This is the percent of over assessed homes in each community. So you see the average for the whole county, that's the red line at the bottom, is 5.7%. This is on page 28 on the big chart. The big one.
28 on the big.
And you can see Sandy Mush has the highest. 14.4% of the homes over the 6-year period in Sandy Mush were overassessed. And I don't know who the low is. I guess the Central Business District was the low with 2.0%. But there's quite a range between different communities. So there's a difference in overassessment across communities. Here it is by table. This is on page 29 on the big report. And if we had time, or if I had a way to put this in a chart, I would try to show you if there's a pattern. So you see for each year, there's 2 columns. One is the number of overassessed properties in that community. And then the shaded line is the percentage of all the homes. How much percent of all homes was the overassessed? So the bottom number there is countywide. In 2016, there was 198 overassessed homes, which accounted for 4.8% of all the homes. Now, if you're interested in the specific community, pick your community and just go across. And the takeaway from this is some communities don't have very many. There's no community that has a consistent pattern that I saw. If you look at, pick a community and go across horizontally, and I don't think there's any that has a big number every year or a small number. They kind of jump around. Which again, I think the takeaway is for overassessed, there's not a trend, a strong trend at the community level. I know that's a lot to digest in that chart, and something you can do later. But you understand, some of them are really small numbers too. You know, there's some zeros. Here's a 0, here's a 0. South side, there again, there's a south side doing weird stuff. 1, 0, 0. Who would have thought, you know, the fastest growing community, highest level of poverty, the highest percentage of Black owner-operated would, owner-occupied would have 0 overassessed properties for 2 years in a row.
Those are all residential properties. There's not any commercial.
Right, no commercial.
Southside, it's not any commercial.
No.
On Southbridge Road.
I think what she was asking was that what he was taking into account was only residential properties, not commercial.
Okay.
The data that he used, not what's actually there.
Commercial data. There are commercial in the south side. That's for sure.
And I wonder if there's a correlation between, so Sandy Mush and Ivy are the two that over the 6-year period that had the 12% and then essentially 14.5%. And I looked at this before tonight. Both of those are in the far reaches of the county. And so, you know, in my mind, it goes to, oh, well, I wonder if those are an assessment issue because they are so close to another county, and maybe those the true comps are in Madison County or Haywood County. I think both of those sort of border Madison and Haywood County. And I don't know if Keith is able to use data from another county, but those are both border counties. And so I was sort of thinking to myself, like, why are these so much different than the rest of them? And that's the only thing I could come up with. So
we can use comps. We do use comps also.
Okay.
Especially they're close to the county border.
Okay.
And then we can go over. We just don't get that data fed to us. We actually got to go get it. It's not like we get the MLS or D transfers.
Yeah. Okay.
But in your profession, you would use that. You would go across those boundaries.
Sure, and I think yes, I would, but I think Keith was saying they do too, which is good. I mean, because you want to use that whole market area rather than just, oh well, it's in Madison County. We don't want to use that. It sounds like Keith folks do that. So,
but you're asking the right question because I thought the same thing. So, and I really can't. I have one slide that I kind of try to get at it. Here's how it looks. the percentage of sales over assessed, and you can definitely see it outside of Biltmore, and Biltmore just made the cutoff. I think they're 7.9. It's primarily what I'd call rural, border, northern border communities. And again, I want to remind you, I have no idea how assessments are made. You know much more than I do. I'm just looking at the outcome here. But there's definitely a difference, and that's the point is.
I have a question. Maybe you can answer this. I'm looking at this chart. It says Biltmore and it says Shiloh, Sweet Creek. But part of Shiloh is on the same color spectrum. I'm on here. I'm here.
On this map.
The big one.
And I'm like, how can it be assessed the same way as Biltmore, is Biltmore Forest included in that, or is it, what's the difference in just Biltmore and Biltmore Forest? And then parts of Shiloh is still in that percentage rate. That makes sense?
Now the colors are different.
No, not at the beginning, not where you see Shiloh at the beginning.
Well, that
Maybe that's
Shiloh,
where,
yeah, Shiloh / Sweet Creek is that whole little, I don't know what shape you call it.
lighter color.
It's right here.
Yeah.
It's right here. This is Shiloh's Sweet Creek. This is all Biltmore or Biltmore Forest.
Well, it's just the label is wrong.
Yeah,
But I say that because, see, some people might get confused.
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah. People that may not know would say that, because I know a lot of people in Shiloh, like I live on the other side of Sweet Creek Road, but I get information and mail and stuff that says I live in Biltmore Forest sometimes, so that's what's confusing. And Keith had to explain about how, even though it looks that way, in their office it's not together. So I was just making sure so people would realize that.
Well, thank you for asking. Yeah, and it's just, again, I'm looking at census tracts and we put a name on it to just kind of reflect what we all kind of think. So to the question about why maybe, I took a gander at it. I took 2 of those correlation charts there, and there's 18 that follow over assessment. We're looking at what are the correlations to over assessment, and they're in the report on page 36. And these are the ones that popped out to me, and I won't spend a whole lot of time on them, but so we've got, these are highly significant. Here's the percentage of over assessed, same on both charts, so more over assessed that way. And it's saying the number of homes sold as a percent of all homes. So sort of the volume of sales that are going on in that community. The percentage of over assessed seems to decline when you have more home sales, which sort of makes sense. And guess what these little dots are here? Here's Sandy Mush and here's Ivy. Not much going on there. So that's an answer right there, or that's something that says something need to look into there. Same chart over here. This is dollar value. Here's Sandy Mush. Here's Ivy. And you can see as more homes are sold, the volume of homes go up, the chances of being over assessed decline. Which, not knowing what you do, but thinking there's more action, you got more things to compare things to. That and Sandy Mush, there's probably not a lot to compare. Make sense?
Who's over there in the 40,000?
40,000, 40. What are you looking at?
The outlier on your right graph.
70,000.
There's one at,
But there's one at 40. We know who 70 is.
Oh, you're talking about this guy right here? In the back of the appendix, it has the numbers. So you'd have to kind of do some cross-referencing. I'd do it, but you would all get real tired of waiting, I think. And you should.
No.
But you can do that in the back. So in the back, in the appendix is all this data. And you could say, hey, I could look at, who's 3%. It's going to be Sandy Mush. We made it through over assessed. We made it through median sales ratio. Now we're going to look at just low priced homes, because I know there's a concern, there should be, that maybe lower priced homes are not assessed with the same equity that higher or mid are. So lower priced homes, I'm doing this 6-year study. And so actually the lower price is only the bottom 10% of each year. So it's a moving number, which I know is confusing. So we put it into deciles to make it even more confusing. So decile 1 is the bottom 10% price homes of each year. And I think I actually have it. If you look at page 39, table 6, the big report, it actually has the prices of that bottom decile 1. So I'm sorry, this is kind of confusing. It took me a while. 39, table 6. It has what the prices are in the lowest, just so you know. Some of those are really low. I think there's like a 20,000. You know what kind of house is 20,000. So that's what we're talking about. And so here's the deciles here. It's a lot of information in this chart, but let me explain it. Here's the lowest priced homes right here. And then above it are the median sales ratios for the bottom for these 6 years. So this would be for 2020, 2019, 2016, 2018, and then you have the 2 reappraisal years at the top, 2017 and 2021. So the takeaway is, here's that range between 1.1 and 9.0. Here's the safe range. These years, as we already know, but now we know with deciles, outside the range, down below the range. And look at that for a while. There's a lot of information here. This is really pretty powerful. And you can say that lower priced homes in 2016 actually did have a higher, significantly higher sales ratio than the others. The takeaway is the 2 reappraisal years, they're right together. It's almost even straight across, a little dip above it. Does that make sense?
Ask a clarifying question. When you calculate the sales ratio, are you using sales and the assessed value from the same year? Meaning the sale happened in 2020 and you're using the assessed value of 2020? They're the same. Okay, just wanted to clarify.
I think Keith took that a step further when you were, because there, so if there was a sale in 2020 and then the assessed value, because the assessed value wouldn't change in year 2020. And I think when you were showing us last time or time before last, there was a calculate. If I'm not mistaken, there was another calculation that was made on some of those slides where it brought that into more of a perspective.
So we also consider time adjustment.
There we go.
So Tom talked about that appreciation rate of 7.5% over year. So if you take a sale 2 years ago and apply that 7% year over year, you're trying to project that into today's.
That's what. And so, but Tom, you did not do this. This is just straight up raw data. If it sold in 2020 and you used the assessed value from 2020, it was really the assessed value from 2017. Correct?
I'm looking at Keith. I think that's right.
Yes.
So, I'm using tax years there.
Yeah. So these are tax years. So the 2020 one that he shows you that's on the bottom.
Yep.
Okay. That would have been using the assessment from the year of 2017.
Correct.
Compared to the sale in 2020.
Correct.
Okay. That's why I showed you earlier that the gap is bigger and bigger.
Yep. I just wanted to make sure Corey got that too. I mean, yeah.
Good question. Okay, so you see where we're at here, and we're looking at low priced homes right now. That's what we're focusing on. And here's that same chart, but as a table. And again, here would be that low priced homes, and you can see the 2017 they got up to 1. again, the important takeaway here is nobody's over assessed. Nobody's over 1.10. That's the takeaway. They're still within the range. They're the lowest price homes, but the median sales ratios are still below 1.10. Make sense? Even though these are a little higher than some of these other rows, they're still within that acceptable IAAO range. They're below the 1.10. They weren't over assessed. This is on page 42. This is low priced home sales as a percent of total home sales. And again, it probably challenges what you may think. We've got Oakley in there, downtown, but everything else primarily is on the more rural border towns. That's where more of the lower priced homes are at. And then on page 40, here's the percentage for each community of lower priced homes. Here again, we have Sandy Mush, Candler out there having the most percentages. And then here's the number of low priced homes, the percent of their total. And then here's that low priced median sales ratio. And again, I'll point out, they're all below 1.00, or I'm sorry, they're not 1.110. So you do have a couple high ones. Just sort of south side 1.03, so be 3% over. Biltmore's even, and then Broad River 1.05. So lower price homes have a little bit higher sales ratios, but they're still within the range, acceptable range. Let's see some. Got it? I'm putting you to sleep. Okay, because this is a lot of stuff here. I understand. Okay, so we made it through the first three things. We made it through median sales ratio, made it through overassessed homes, and we made it through low priced homes. And the last section, which is just 3 slides, is there's other industry-wide measures of assessment equity. They're pretty technical, but they make sense. So this one's called the COD, the Coefficient of Dispersion, which is the average percentage deviation ratio from the median. So how far from the median are the ratios, and the acceptable range is between 5 and 15. And the takeaway is at the county level, within the state, everything's within the state ratio. There is a table after that chart. That chart's on page 50. If you go to the next page, there's a table that looks at individual communities, and I've highlighted them high or low. There's a few that are up, a few that are down. And there again, I think for considerations of equity or inequity, you want to look for a pattern that goes year to year to year for the same community. And that would say there's a problem here. But if you're looking at changes between vertically, then you're looking at primarily reappraisal years versus non-reappraisal years. Another exciting measure, this is called the price-related differential. It's calculated by dividing the mean ratio by the weighted mean ratio. Again, it's showing, it's called vertical equity within the community. So is it equal across all different homes at the community level? The big takeaway you can see is counties in the safe region during the reappraisals, it gets real close to 1.0, and following that page is a table breakdown of the same thing, which I can't talk too much because it's very micro level and you have to do a lot of calculations. Again, I'd look for, if there's colors going all the way across, highlighted out of whack would be a problem. And the last painful one is called the PRB, the coefficient of price related bias. These are all as you can recognize, these are industry-wide sort of internal things that folks would use. And it's regressing the percentage difference from the mean ratio on the percentage differences in value for different values homes. So it'd be looking at the value, if appraisals are done correctly for different values of home. And if you look at the following page, you have a table where there is some more color on that table, but you'd have to really do some digging to figure out what those are indicating. So that wasn't meant to add a whole lot. That was part of the contract, by the way. That's Keith's fault. Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
People that come in the area and all these apartments and condos and things that are coming up, are we paying tax for them, for these properties?
Well, the owner of the building's paying tax.
Owner of the building, so all the people that live in the apartments, they just pay their rent or whatever.
Right. Typically. And then the landlord or the owner of the building pays the rent. So you're not paying.
Well, I always wondered about that because it's a lot.
Now, when their kids go to school or if they go to jail, then you're paying for that. But that's different. I digress. Okay. So this is what I call these my takeaways. And the reason it's just me, you may have, this is your report. And so you can come up with your own takeaways. But my quick takeaways are, we already know the county is experiencing significant home price growth, which affects assessment. Some communities are experiencing what I think we can agree would be explosive growth. Southside is a great example of that. Between reappraisals, the number and proportion of underassessed properties increase. 2020, 70% of homes were underassessed. No community presented median sales ratios above 1. They weren't overassessed for the last 6 years. So that's an important takeaway, I think, too. There's no one community that's getting overassessed. None of them at all that we found, and definitely none over periods of time. Community, race, ethnicity, or poverty didn't correlate to higher assessments. That's those little nasty charts with the dots on them. I didn't see anything there. You know, you can look at them and try to figure out something else. In fact, you'll notice one chart, they actually decrease, median sales ratios decrease as a percentage of Black or African-American owner occupied increase. I think you'd have to look at that and figure out that has a lot to do with Southside's way out there in the far end, and Southside has a low relative median sales ratio. Overassessed properties account for 5.7% of sales. I don't know what you were thinking, if that's a lot or not. Of course, you want it to be 0, but it was 5.7. When it comes to overassessed properties, again, I didn't find any race, ethnicity, or poverty that correlated to higher percentages of overassessed properties. As we showed, those were sandy mush and ivy. They were out there, primarily rural communities. Geographically, communities with higher percentage of overassessed properties tend to be in the northern, more rural communities. Low-priced home sales countywide, and the communities had sales ratios within the acceptable ratio ranges. And then finally, among other measures of assessment equity, the county was within the accessible range for all 6 years. So you made it. Congratulations. This report. So I'd love to hear any questions before. By the way, the last page of the slide presentation is my information, and I don't have any problem somebody calling me up or sending me an email and asking me a question. So don't hesitate. And this is a lot of information. This took me a long time to put together, and to dump it on you in just a few minutes. Thank you, because it is a lot of information. And I hope it's helpful. Any more questions? We're good? Thank you for your patience, and hopefully it helps.
Thank you, Tom. So our last agenda items is just to talk about next steps and future meetings. There was, we want to revisit the request from Ori to have Joe Minicuzzi from Urban 3 to present data to you all. We reached out to Joe to get a copy of a presentation or something for you to look at, and he suggested the video link that I sent out to you all, which was a conversation with Larry Clark from the International Association of Assessing Officers. Definitely had a chance to review that. Joe thought that might be a good prelude or introduction into maybe the data that he would present, but he didn't have a specific presentation to provide at that point in time. And since that point, Chairman Brownie Newman has reached out to us to explain and to provide information that the presentation from Urban 3 to the commissioners is actually the impetus for the reason that the commissioners formed this committee. And so for the planning members of the team, that sheds light on for us is that that information that will be provided from Joe and Urban 3 is a piece of the puzzle that is information for you all to hear. Because without that piece of the puzzle, we won't be able to really address some of the questions that the commissioners also may have about that data that he presented. So it's not necessarily to agree or disagree or on the content of the information, but to hear the information so that you all have the entire picture of what you need to help move us into making recommendations back to the commission. So that being said, I just want to see if anybody disagrees with that, give you all a chance to react to what I'm saying or ask me any questions about that. The planning committee has decided to schedule Joe for a future time to present that information. So just want, if anybody see that differently or have any comments or questions?
We made that decision of no 2 meetings ago, didn't we? Or
I thought we did too, but that, say again, I'm sorry.
But when the commission said we need to have a meeting, didn't it? We got the information that we got that Ronnie was saying that we need to have him to come in and speak about Urban 3.
The information from Chairman Newman was that information that Joe presented to the commissioners is the reason why the commissioners created this committee. And the planning team believes that without that holistic picture of all of the information that was coming to the commissioners, that you all won't have the full picture of what they have questions.
You presented that first night we were here though, right?
did.
Yes, yes. This is Miriam. I guess I'm a little confused. Wasn't Tom hired to extrapolate this data that he, like in this, I don't know how many pages this was, wasn't he hired to actually extrapolate real data to share with us to address, like I think Urban 3 was one of the proposals that the county already received and Tom DeVette was the one that was chosen. Is that not correct?
I thought so.
So, I mean, if we're looking at, just a comment, if we're looking at raw data, like Tom presented, this is not his opinion, this is raw data. Like, I'm a little confused by, like, how many more proposals do we need to have when Tom was hired? You know, it's really good. I would like to be able to even absorb this data now that Tom has given us, you know, his insight into it, because there's a lot of graphs. But, you know, I guess I'm just confused why we need more. Especially, we've talked about this before, so I'm a little confused.
We did talk about it before. That's what I just said. And I thought we said we're getting ready to hear Tom. Now we did hear Tom and we don't need the other. He wasn't chosen as the proposal. So I still say no.
I haven't seen,
Taking a vote.
I haven't seen Urban Three's presentation, so I don't know how it differs or how similar it is to what Tom is presenting. I can't speak to that.
It appears to me that if the presentation from Urban 3 was presented to the county commissioners and it brought up these questions, and we haven't heard what all that brought up, it's hard for us to address what the concerns were from the county commissioners, even with this great set of data, unless we have, I mean, beyond the charter or the three things that we're supposed to look at. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Everybody?
No, I guess my only question would be, is this committee driving the ship as a committee, or are the county commissioners driving the ship and sort of dictating what we listen to and hear? And I guess that's the bigger question for this committee, is that are we acting as a unit together, or are we sort of taking directive from the county commissioners? And if that, and I guess that's for me, that's the question: is are we here to do this, or do we need to follow directive from the county commissioners?
We have the directions from the county commissioners. Right. I mean, that's the charge. That's the charge. Yeah. Right. That's right. That's where I was working. That's what we've been charged with, is what she went over again this afternoon when we first started. What we've been charged with is 6 items or whatever they are. So we know what we're charged with.
What we serve at the pleasure of the county commissioner. And if, out of respect for what the county commissioner, the chairman, Ronnie Newman, has said and stated, that we should listen to, and let him come in to speak, I think out of respect, because we don't serve on our own. We were appointed by the commissioners. And if that's what they want for us to hear again, there may be some pieces we had not heard before. Out of respect of knowing why we're here and who appointed us to be here, we need to have the opportunity to let him come back in, give him the minutes, let him speak. It will not hurt. I'm just saying, I don't want to, I was proud to be interviewed by the commissioner to serve on this commission. Therefore, we have to respect it, because we cannot, I don't think we can take a vote on it. I think that we have to allow that process to happen. And it's not gonna hurt us just to listen to him.
Sure.
For whatever, if it's 10 minutes or whatever, won't take, for him to give his presentation, and then that's it. And I understand what you're saying, but believe me, I know who appointed us.
And I agree with that. We've been appointed, and but they told us what to do, so they should let us do it. I agree that out of respect. I 100% agree with your statement. But then we should do what they told us to do.
Well, that's what do you want to weigh in on this?
No.
Hold up. I mean, I think that's fair. Say again, I'm sorry.
Say it again, Ms. Bobbitt?
No, go ahead.
I happen to agree with Bobbitt on this one, but not for the same reasons that she stated, because of courtesy and all. What I do agree with is the reason we're here tonight is the Urban Tree presentation that they made. And it wasn't just made to us, it was made to Dogwood, and others in Dogwood funded that study through UNCA. Remember? To truly look at this study. So my takeaway is, if we haven't heard that presentation, that's the piece that will always be nagging at us, and then we did not fully address that issue. So for me to hear that presentation, give it its time, and then take all the other things we heard into consideration, and then say, yes or no. We've heard it. Here's how we address it. But I think without that piece, we would never answer that true question of whether or not we were unfair, unjust, inequitable, all these pieces that was raised in that conversation. So that's the reason why I would say, if you're asking my opinion, you take a listen to it and then weigh the facts.
Right.
Thank you.
Is it possible for me to just make a clarification that I feel like isn't being adequately addressed? When Mr. Minicozy came and spoke to us, it was not a formal presentation. He spoke during public comment.
Yeah, sure.
And therefore, he was not able to actually get through the slides that he wanted to be able to push through. However, even the structure of public comment for that information, I don't believe is an adequate vehicle. Now, I'm just saying that was how you.
Sure. I guess my only question would be then, why did we choose Tom over Urban 3 in order to come up with this stuff?
I didn't do the analysis, but I do believe that we will look for a true independent voice, someone that's just going to look at the data, as Debbie said, and give us an answer, not an opinion, not anything else that was coming into the space, but a true analysis of just data.
Okay.
So put that aside. The conversation for Urban 3 is absolutely based on other data, not our actual appraisal data. They looked at data.
I gotta correct that.
Well, the data that we shared with Tom, we did not share with Urban 3, right? We did not give her.
Urban 3 used the data that was from the open data portal from Buncombe County.
What did Tom use? Okay. So I would want to say.
I mean, we're using.
So we're using the same data.
Staff did the analysis on Tom, and we know we've worked with Tom forever on public health data, social determinants of health, and all this stuff. So we know that. Urban Tree came to the space with a definitely conceived conversation that said we were absolutely doing this incorrect based on Chicago studies and all this other data that he showed to the commissioners, led us to believe that we were unfairly taxing lower income people, and we are told neighborhoods are wrong. So that's why we were here, because we were trying, in my opinion, to truly get the right answer and to make sure that we were not unfairly taxing any of our residents in our community.
And we need to, yeah, absolutely. And I hope that we all come up with that answer to the question. But yeah, because that's what, as you say, that's what we've been charged with. But if we now have the data and we know what we're charged with, and we've also heard from the North Carolina officials, not Chicago officials, I still don't get it. I still don't see why we do that. I mean, we paid Tom. And I mean, I think we all still need a little more time in his info, but after tonight, we've got the data.
I still say that maybe his presentation would be different, even though you have the data. The way he may present his presentation may be different than what we've heard. So my thing is, I just want to hear him. I want to hear what he has to say. I want to, even if it's the same, he's not going to present it the same way that, Tom has presented it. And, and I don't want to get into this about, we paid Tom to do whatever. We're going way out over. I just want to hear him. I don't care. Right. I just want to hear his perspective and how he's going to give his presentation, that from the public comments that he gave that night was more realistic to me than the data that I've seen here. And that was just a little snippet of his public comment.
I don't understand that last statement.
Well, I will say it for you again. When he gave his public comment, right, the way he expressed and he showed through his public comment, I could understand what he said more so than all of the data that's on the chart.
Okay, and I don't think, okay, now I hear what you're saying, but I don't think what he said, not Tom, but Joe, thank you. Joe was giving, at that point, the data that he did. He may have said it different, but he wasn't working on data.
That's what I'm saying. But I want to hear him give his presentation, which would be differently from what we've heard. So let's give him a chance. And since it did come down from the commissioner office, I'm gonna say it again, that we need to respect who put us in these positions, and let's just hear him. It's not gonna hurt.
I agree with Babette, and I think that the last bullet of number 3 of what we're our goal to provide input into equity concerns. It seems to me again that Joe's presentation to the county commissioners raised these concerns, not just the how the appraisals were done, which from all we've seen look good, right, based on this data, but are there outliers? You know, we have these communities, we might have smoothed out some averages. And so that number 3, providing input to equities concerns, I feel like we would not be able to make recommendations without hearing what they heard that charged them with setting up this committee. So.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's not going to hurt my feelings. I just to listen to more data. I just think that, you know, we paid Tom for a reason. We've heard from Joe, but if other board members feel like it's important to hear that, let's do it. I mean,
let me chime in here. We did not hear from Joe from official capacity, and I think the information that he put together warrants that we hear from him from official capacity and not just a.
But I guess my point is this, Dwayne, is that before there was no. There was a discussion around the group, and everybody's like, no, we're gonna hear what Tom's got to say. We can get the data from there, if I remember correctly. But then now, and again, it comes down to are we taking directive from the county commissioners? If we are, totally fine. I just want to know that. That way, I know who's driving the ship. And so. Before, when this committee was asked, it was no, we're good. We're gonna hear Tom's thing. I don't think we need to hear that. And now we're saying, okay, we do need to hear that. And fine with me. It's another night here, and I'll be here, and I'll be present, and I'll be listening. But it comes down to: is this committee taking the bull by the horns, or are the county commissioners? Either way, I'm fine with it. I just want to know where we're taking directive from. That's all.
It seems to me that what Tom put together tonight, as thorough as it is, would indicate that we don't have great disparity, that everything seems to be going along on a reasonable course. Yet, my time on this planet, and as I talk to people, I know that that's not the case. Okay? Well, therefore, we need more information so that I can better understand where the breakdown is, because this does not show me where the breakdown is. Okay? And anybody that already understands that, good. But if I'm going to be part of this committee, then I'd like to understand it too.
And I agree with you. And the little bit that I did hear from Joe, he actually had pictures. Remember when he had the picture of the house on one side of the street? That it cost so much, and on the other side it was less, or he had more of a visual. And then since we are having, because I've asked the people from my community to come in so they can hear and they can get informed. I report back to them, but they're here. So, all of these comps and stuff, they'll go home and process it. But I want them to get a different perspective of what, and it's not going to take. If he takes 10 minutes, if you say 10 minutes, he'll come up here and he'll have all this stuff and he'll do it in 10 minutes. But I'm going to go right back to the same thing I said before. We were commissioned by the Buncombe County Commissioners. That's who interviewed you for this position. So we serve at their pleasure because they don't have to have this committee. So we're not out here on our own.
No, of course not.
And just to get back to you.
Real briefly. So you got an email from the chair of the commissioners. The commissioners, the board themselves, did not send that email. So I want to separate the two conversations because we keep saying the board of county commissioners. There's 7 of them, and not all 7 was on that email. But the chairman of the commission did ask you guys to look at it again. And I'll submit to you that we will never answer the question if 2 or 3 of the committee is still thinking that there's some issues with the deferred data.
Sure.
Correct? And
I agree with that.
And so what I would want you to think about is the same exact presentation that he made to the commissioners is what he makes to you tonight, or whatever night you choose. That same, because he has gone to the community, he has gone to several organizations and showed that presentation with the pictures, with a house up on the mountain that we don't, he's looked at neighborhoods differently. We have educated you enough about neighborhoods and how we do data. So I will want you to open your mind, listen to that presentation. If you want to give him 20 minutes on your agenda, let's do that. But I would want it to be the same exact presentation, no updated data. Right. Same presentation he shared with you. And then once you get that data, hopefully you get it early so you can digest it and then listen to him. And then ask us those questions that arises from that conversation. So I hear you, Ms. Debbie. I understand what you're saying, but I think it would do this process justice if we can have both sides.
And I just want to add, I am not against Joe or Urban 3 coming in here and doing a presentation. I want everybody to understand that. My only issue was we had talked about it. We, as a committee, decided that Tom was tasked with putting this data together. And when it was asked of the whole group, we said, no, we're good here. That's my own, and it's not until we get an email that, and that's my only issue, and it's not an issue. I'm fine with Joe taking up an hour if he wants it.
No.
Well, well, I'm just saying for me, you know, if whatever it takes to make the group feel comfortable, I'm just I just want to be clear that I don't have a problem with Joe presenting. It's just that this group had sort of decided beforehand, and I think we can all agree that we all decided that, and I think it was unanimous that we were going to listen to what Tom had to say. So that's the only red flag.
I don't think anyone has anything against Joe or his company or, you know, Ori or any of that group per se. It is, and we, you know, we're running over the dead cat and making it flatter and flatter.
But you know what, I'm gonna say this. I'm not a tax assessor. I'm not in real estate. I'm not an appraiser. But this is a lot. You may understand it more than I do. But I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna research it. But I want to hear from Joe because he's just a person that's gonna come and talk about something that he's passionate about. And maybe I'll get more understanding because it won't be as complicated. When we first said no, I didn't know all of this was coming. So I need another perspective. And so that's what I'm
Fair
saying.
enough.
I want another perspective. And, you know, you can absorb it differently than I absorb it. Or maybe Dwayne absorbs it. But I want to absorb it where somebody's going to come and tell me, this is how we do. This is what, you know, and I'll get that and I can put that piece with this piece and I'll be fine.
And may I just say one more thing? I respect decision-making, but I also think that once you make a decision, if you will receive new information or new perspective, it deserves to be revisited. The decision deserves to be revisited. So I think that we must, I think we talked maybe first or second meeting about transparency and trust with the community. If we don't hear directly what the county commissioners heard, I think that it would be very difficult for whatever we come out with for people in certain communities.
Sure. Well, then I think that the county commissioners or whoever should have said, in order for this to be, in order for there to be credible results from this committee, then we need to hear from Urban 3.
Yeah, I was just
say that
thinking,
straight up,
I
like
heard that.
right up front, like, hey, in order to get credible results, you have to hear from Urban 3.
But we didn't have, it didn't happen. So let's
did
move
not.
on. Let's move on. Is Joe coming or what?
As a group, pass that.
I do not. I'm not sure how Brownie knew that you hadn't heard from Urban 3 at some point. I'm not sure if you had a conversation with Joe or Ori. I'm not sure. But he heard it and he just acted. He did not go to the board to get consensus.
So it
He
wasn't the
just-
whole commissioner.
Correct.
Well, I know I had a conversation with Ori and I wanted to hear Joe. So,
I fought for it.
based on the data that we received today, are we able to do our charge? Because again, the graphs show that there are no disparities. The graph shows that everything is within normal, reasonable guidelines. But we know that that's not the case. So therefore, I need more information, or I'm not gonna be satisfied with what we've done here tonight. And I'm not concerned about hurting anybody's feelings that work for the county, work on the board, or any of you per se as commissioner. I'm here to do a task, and I'm gonna do that to the best of my ability. So I'm not gonna do this sugarcoat game or this dance that you guys are doing. I want the information, I want the facts. Period.
Thank you.
May I everybody because I'm gonna do this. What I have to say to you is that I know the data as good as anybody in here. But what I want you to understand about Joe's presentation is that his approach is different. Okay, it is different. And you're going to hear the data presented in a totally different way. And there are, as Bobby said, you got to get specific little examples of one house or two houses across the city. Whereas Tom looked at the big picture. A lot of Joe's presentation focuses more on specific issues. He talks a little bit about methodology, which Tom doesn't touch on, and he shouldn't. We didn't ask him to do that. But Joe talks a little bit about methodology too. So in my opinion, I have solved the presentation a couple times. And it's going to tell you something different than you've heard before. Okay. So you are going to hear it different. That's what I want. That's my opinion of it. You are going to hear something different. I also would agree that probably if you don't hear it, that there's always going to be a piece missing. Okay. And that's my opinion of it. Whether you agree with it or like it or don't, at least you allowed it to happen.
Sure.
And take it into consideration. And if you disagree with it, Joe's standing here, you tell me you disagree with it. I mean, you would Tom, didn't you? You knew me, you knew others. So, yeah, that's my opinion.
Did you, last question, I know it's time to go. Did you say he's already been scheduled? Did I
We
miss that?
penciled him in because we wanted to make sure that we had a placeholder because we don't want this to, if he was to come, then we don't want it to be June before we, it's busy too. We all have schedules. So yes, we have penciled him in.
For when?
For
April 6th.
April 6th.
Is that our next meeting?
It is not our next meeting.
No.
March 23rd will be our next meeting.
So this is going to seem like I am not going to be at the meeting because I voiced opposition tonight. But I promise you,
I'm gonna say that.
I have a flight to catch, and you can look at my calendar on April 6th, and I was going to call into that meeting. I'll be in Aspen, and I'm coming back that day.
Oh, bless your heart.
Right. So.
Suspicious.
Yeah.
That's why I pulled my calendar up because I was like, I think that's the day I'm flying back. So, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah,
You
the
said
rest of them.
you will be calling in. Is that what I heard?
I
you
hope
say?
so. Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you what time my flight. No, I will not be calling in. My flight is at 4:15, and I land in Asheville at 7.
No,
Fortunately, it's recorded and you will be able to.
Yeah.
Record.
That's
Okay.
funny.
And there are a couple dates where we have a 5:30 start.
Yeah. Next week, the next session on the 23rd, y'all, we're gonna be starting at 5:30.
5:30 here in the same place.
And May 4th and May 18th are the other two dates that will have a 5:30 start date. But we'll let you guys know prior to the meeting. Just want to put that out there for general consumption.
All right. We are over time.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you all for your time tonight. And
Good
good discussion.
She has a question. I'm a late comer to what's been going on, sorry to say,
But I appreciate what I've heard, and I really appreciate you, Ms. Bobbitt and Mr. Dwayne, because you sound exactly like you're talking from the community. I really do appreciate that. I understand exactly what you're saying, and I'm not pointing fingers at nobody because I'm just not coming in. But I kind of feel in some direction with you based on the assessment of what I received. So I'm gonna try to attend and just kind of be a listener. So thanks for everything. Thanks for all of the y'all soon. If not, and I'll catch you on TV, but I hope to be able to come.
Thank you all. Thank you for your time tonight. Concludes our meeting for this evening.
Or later. Well, I won't be here the 6th, so I better go and get tonight or next, or in the next meeting.
Absolutely.